Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Film Kiba. Yeah, today I'm on my way to the Cape Coast Castle to do some short vlogging on it. The building history room of the castle contains pictures. You can see a drone shot of the castle, brief history, drawings and mineral resource and pictures of the castle before we tour the castle with a tour guide.
Welcome you all to Cape Coast Slave Castle. Please come closer. Before we start the tour, my name is Tony Wady. Before what you are all standing lies the male slave dungeon. The floor that leads to the male dungeon is very slippery. You take your time to walk slowly, please. Please go. Slowly, you take your time. The floor is slippery. Okay, I officially welcome you all to Cape Coast once again. My name is Wady Tony, and where we are right now is called the Male Slave Dungeon. The Male Slave Dungeon comprises of 5 cells or 5 chambers: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. In each one of them were 200 African men. So that means we're 1,000 African men in a male dungeon. This is where the African men would defecate, eat, sleep. They were here for 3 months. Right on top of the male dungeon, the English colonizers built a church. The name of the church is Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. That hole or that window was the only source of light in air for 200 men here. The conditions here were very bad. This place was a place of death and terror. There are 3 castles in Ghana. These are Elmina Castle, Osu Castle, and Cape Coast Castle. Elmina Castle was built by the Portuguese in 1482. It is the biggest and the oldest castle. Osu Castle was established by the Danish in 1661. And this castle is called Cape Coast Castle, built by the English colonizers in the year 1665. But this castle is 356 years old. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to come here. They got to Ghana in the year 1471. In the year 1482, the Portuguese finally settled and built Elmina Castle. Elmina Castle was not built for the transatlantic slave trade. It was a trading post until 1492, when this man called Christopher Columbus claimed he discovered the Americas. When that part of the world was discovered, the Europeans realized that they could cultivate sugarcane to produce sugar. So the Native Americans were used as cheap laborers by the Europeans. But it got to a point where the Europeans realized that the Native Americans were dying. So they wanted other cheap laborers, other alternative. They wanted an alternative. And there's this man we call Bartolomeo de las Casas. He's a priest. He is a Catholic priest. He recommended that the Europeans should rather come for Africans rather than using the Native Americans as cheap laborers. And that was the genesis. During that time, our ancestors in Africa, I don't know why, but I do think that they didn't have future implications. They didn't know the future implications of what we're doing. So they accepted things like clothing items, red wine, sugar, gunpowder, mirrors from the Europeans. And then they will send a group of people we call slave raiders out. They were the ones who were kidnapping Africans from various jurisdictions, like a place like Mali, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and this is where all the African men were brought. Here in the middle dungeon, like I said, I made mention of 5 cells or 5 chambers. Each one of them were 200 men. Now, before we continue, just have a look there. One go inside, one run. Alright, just have a look there. But just please go inside. Inside and Kasana. So that those behind you have to go inside. Please go inside. And I wanted you to see how the meal dungeon looks like by putting the light out. The meal dungeon has 5 cells. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. In each one of them were 200 men. 200 men were here. 200, 200, 200, 200. So 200 by 5 means we're 1,000 men in a meal dungeon. Okay? Now for 200 men here, these holes are there. These 3 holes were the only source of light in air for them. Can you all see it?
Yeah.
Okay, you see there's a big hole above our heads. We call that hole the mark of the walls of the castle. So the English colonizers out there wanted to know whatever that was going on here. Anytime the African men tried to break the doors, the noise would just pass through that hole out. Because of that hole, the English colonizers could hear and could know whatever that was going on here. Now look at the floor carefully. I want to show you something. You see bricks, right? You see bricks all over. The bricks you see are the original floor of the male slave dungeon. When this castle was built in the year 1665, this was the original floor. But I am about to show you something. Look in the middle of the dungeon. You see there's a trench. Yeah, this trench is when the African men pass water or when they pee. It will just go through and eventually it is connected to the ocean. It will go into the ocean. It was in a middle dungeon that the African men would defecate, eat, sleep for 3 months. There was a wide spread of diseases like yellow fever, malaria, diarrhea, cancer. Some even got blind because the conditions were bad. Did you see the floor? Yes. Please come. But we did see many bricks in the first chamber where we just came from. But I made mention of the fact that the original floor of the male dungeon are the bricks that we saw in the first chamber. What you see here, we were supposed to be seeing bricks, and we were supposed to be standing on bricks. The original floor are bricks. But because the African men were dying, many of them bleeded till they died. This is where they defecated, they slept here, they vomited. So their feces, urine, food that they were eating eventually formed this floor, that floor, and covered the original bricks. So basically, we are standing on DNA and food relics of our ancestors. You see there's a big hole there. Can you see the hole? Yeah. Now that hole is connected to the church on top of the middle dungeon. Please, those there, please come in. Very well. You see that big hole there? Now that big hole is connected to the church. I made mention of a church on top of the middle dungeon. So the English colonizers would worship God in the church. And the same people stand there and look at the African men in the middle dungeon. Please come. When you come, please come in. We are waiting for you. Dude, just keep coming in. Come in. Just come in. You are many. Come in. Don't stand there. Come in so that those behind you also be encouraged to come. One row. Please come in. Don't just stand there. When you come in, you also encourage those behind you to also come inside. Okay? So this place is the last cell. This is the last cell. I made mention of 5 cells or 5 chambers. In each one of them were 200 men. 200 by 5 means there were 1,000 men. That was the highest or the maximum number. Or at a peak season, there were 1,000 men here. But at a lean season, there were just about 150 men in each one of them. But that's the maximum number I'm giving you, 1,000 men in the middle dungeon. Now you see there's a small cell there. That small cell is where all the African men who got sick weak and blind were left to die. And after they die, the colonizers will take their bodies and dump them or trash them in the transatlantic ocean. Before what I understand lies an altar. This is a shrine. There are 77 of them in Kiba, but this one is the leader among the 77. And this shrine is called Nana Taber. The man sitting on the shrine is the priest, the traditional priest. He's in charge of this altar. His name is Nana Kwame Nkra. This is part of what we call the African traditional spirituality or the African traditional religion. This is what our ancestors were practicing before Europeans introduced Christianity into the continent. But this wasn't here when the African men were in the Middle Danger. The altar was established here after the abolishment. There used to be a big tunnel very big tunnel right here. The tunnel starts here to the door we call the door of no return. So all the 1,000 men in the Middle Danger were not allowed to walk through where we all came. They were all chained and shackled and forced through the tunnel to the door we call the door of no return. In the moment the African men walked through that door, that was all. They were never allowed to come back to Africa. But these tunnels were blocked off in the year 1834 to officially mark the abolishment. But when you go out there, I'm going to show you the tunnel. It's big. It's even bigger than the Middle Danger. Any questions, please?
What led to the blockage of the tunnel?
And what led to the blockage of the tunnel? The abolishment of the transatlantic slave trade occurred in the year 1833, but the English colonizers were still coming. There was a governor called Captain George McLean. He blocked off the tunnel later in 1834 to officially mark the abolishment of the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, yes, please.
I'd like to hear the priest's view of Christianity now.
The priest,
View of Christianity.
because of the master.
I'd like to hear the priest's view of Christianity.
How does it happen? You want to hear it from the horse's mouth? From him?
Yeah.
What's the agent? The agent, they are from, as well as the Christians who are working on that. He said the white people brought Christianity in order to manipulate and lie to Africans. That is what he thinks. Do you have any other questions?
What else?
Why is the shrine here? The shrine was here a long time ago. Pardon? It was here before the Europeans came, but it was after the abolishment that they brought. When they came, the people, the countries took it some. It was after the abolishment that they brought the shrine back.
Yes.
Yeah, once you are done looking, you just come in. Once you see you come. You have many places to see today, please. Let's double up a little bit.
Good.
Just a small here by the global African diaspora, Black Europeans, Black Americans, and many more to pay respect to the ancestors who died in the Middle Danger. Some of them do come here, they light candles in order to show respect and honor to the ancestors who died. Yeah. But we are not done yet. We have a lot to see. To be honest with you, we have a lot. So let's continue, please. This way, please. We have a long way to go. Please come. Okay, this way. Please come. Come this way. There are 4 graves I would like to show all of you before we continue. Wherever you are standing, please turn over, turn around, and make sure you face me. Now there are 4 identified graves. I'm using the word identified because there are many graves that are not being identified due to the fact that there are no names of those who were buried in. 1, 2, 3 are for white people or Europeans. That grave there is for black men. We call this black man Philip Kwaku or Philip Kweku, a Wednesday born. Now, this man's father was a middleman, an African man who used to work for the English colonizers. Because of that, when his son Philip Kwaku was 11 years old, the English colonizers and the church on top of the mill dungeon took Philip Kwaku to London to study theology. Philip Kwaku was the first African to become an Anglican priest in London. He became a priest in the church on top of the male slave dungeon. He promoted Christianity and the English form of education. Philip Kwaku was born in 1741. He died in 1816. Though he was a black man, but he was not an enslaved African man. He died at the age of 75 years old. Now, before the grave that I'm standing lies the grave of an English lawyer by the name C.B. Whitehead. We don't know what killed C.B. Whitehead. He died at the age of 38 in 1812. These 2 graves is for a couple. 1, 2, 3. The 3rd grave is for the governor of the castle. His name is Captain George MacLean. Captain George MacLean was a governor from 1830 until 1844. Back in the mill dungeon, I made mention of a very big tunnel. MacLean sealed that tunnel in the year 1834 to officially mark the abolishment. Captain George MacLean was born in 1801. He died in 1847 at the age of 46. Malaria killed him. And this is the wife of Captain George MacLean. Her name is Letitia Elizabeth Landon, a white woman who committed suicide after she found out that her husband, MacLean, was cheating on her with a black woman. She couldn't take it. But there are some historians who claim that Letitia didn't commit suicide, but it was the black mistress of the husband who poisoned her. Letitia Elizabeth Landon died at the age of 36 in the bedroom of the governor. West Africa was known as white man's grave because malaria killed many of them here. Any questions, please? Please come. It's a very small cell. We call this cell the male punishment cell. Back in the mill dungeon, I made mention of 1,000 men. No, the African men in the mill dungeon were not submissive. They were not weak men. They tried to fight back for their freedom and right. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, that the African men were very submissive. That's a fallacy. It's a lie. They tried to fight back. All the African men who tried to fight back for their freedom and rights were brought in this small cell to be killed. This cell used to have 3 doors. First door, the middle door, and the last door. Now, if you're a man in the middle dungeon and you try to fight back for your freedom and rights, the English colonizers will bring you here. This cell has no windows. I personally do not call this a cell. I call this cell the grave of Kiba's castle. The reason is because all the African men who were brought here to be killed did not have access to food, air, light, and water till they died. Slowly and painfully. Please come.
Hey.
Please come in. One Right. What's the one? I'm good. I want some focal there. Look carefully, you will realize that there are no windows here. No windows. And where we just came from had three doors. The first door, the middle door, and then the third door. Back in the building, where I did mention were 1,000 men. Some of the men tried to kill the English colonizers, which were brought all of them. Not less than 8 African men were brought here at the time. After that, the English colonizers would close the door and lock them. The African men were here with their food, air, light, and water. So they all died, slowly and painfully, to serve as a lesson to the others who died, to the others who tried to fight back.
That lesson that this was just for US. How would
The rest. Oh, after those who died here, after those who were brought here died, the English colonizers would bring the rest of the men on the coast to observe them down those who died in the ocean, as a way of instilling fear in them, so they would be able to fight back. So this place was one of the mechanisms that the English colonizers used in order to keep the African men down, to break them psychologically. Is that okay if I put the light out?
Wait. You close it.
Put the light out so that you can see how dark it is.
Okay, no light. Hello, no noise, nobody talks. For 7 seconds, please. Let's all be silent. Off your phones. Please come.
Great story, man.
2038. Okay, back in the middle dungeon, I made mention of a very big tunnel system. Do you remember?
Yeah.
From the middle dungeon, I said there was a big tunnel. All of this is the tunnel. We're on top of the tunnel right now. Okay, the African men in the middle dungeon were not allowed to walk through this courtyard, the door of no return. The English colonizers could have allowed them. But imagine 1,000 men in the courtyard, and about 65 of them were shackled without reason. And the African men of those times were not like us, we are babies. We were very powerful, very resilient men. The English colonizers knew they knew that very well. So they didn't allow them, they couldn't take that chance. They couldn't allow them fear. So they chained them, they shackled them, and forced all of them from the middle dungeon to the door we call the door of no return. The door of no return was the final exit of all the slave Africans who survived the conditions in the male and the female slave dungeons. Now this part of the tunnel system is not the exit. This is where the English colonizers will stand and urge the African men to keep walking through. Go! The sound of the gun is enough to humble people. Just the sound. You just urge them to keep walking through to the door we call the door of no return. The door of no return lies there. So this is an underground tunnel. You just urge them, go, and the African men walk through the door we call the door of no return. It's still the tunnel system. You know, I made mention of the fact that the tunnel system begins in the middle dungeon to the door of no return. All of this part is the tunnel system. But this very small place is not the exit of the tunnel system. This is not where the African men came out from. This part of the tunnel system is a security post where the English colonizers will stand and urge the African men to keep walking through to the door we call the door of no return. Please, it is important to note that the tunnel is deep. Nobody goes down there. If you fall there, I don't know how you get you out. It's deep. Europeans didn't come to Africa to joke. They meant business. It meant a lot of business, serious business. And millions died because of the gold and because the Europeans to use the lives of black people to develop their continents in their various jurisdictions. They have to kill millions. Nobody goes there. Let's go to the next one. Let me show you how the tunnel system is. Please come. When you come inside. When you come inside. This is where the tunnel system ends. It ends right here. And from where we are standing, we were supposed to be seeing the male slave dungeon. But because the tunnel got blocked off in the year 1834, that is why we can't see the tunnel system. Now, the tunnel system got blocked off in the year 1834 because the abolishments occurred in the year 1833. But the English colonizers were still coming because they were very selfish. They didn't want to stop. There was a governor we call Captain George McLean. He blocked off the tunnel later in 1834 to officially mark it. Please note, there has never been an abortion. It was a transformation. Europeans realized that they took a lot from African people. So they moved on to what you call colonialism. Where it was still take and take from the Africans. And that's another form of economic still going on. But there used to be a very tiny door right here, very small door. Size-wise, I'm just demonstrating, very tiny like this. We call this door the door of no return. This was the final exit of all the millions African men in the middle dungeon were shipped to the Americas. But the English colonizers realized that it was not safe and it was very dangerous for them to control the 1,000 men there. Like I told you, we are babies. The African men of those times were very strong men, very resilient men. So they chained them and they separated them. About 25 of them were on the same chain. So the first person on the chain had to take a step, one step. Before those behind him, they walk on the middle dungeon through the tunnel system and then force them through this door. The moment the African men were through this door, there were big slave ships awaiting. They would just force them onto and ship them off to the Americas. But this door of no return got sealed off because the sea waves were very violent. So the English colonizers sealed this door. That was not the end. After this door was sealed off, they'll bring the African men through where the ladies stand, that entrance to the other door of no return, closer to the female slave dungeons. And that is where I am taking you to. Any questions? Yes.
How did you get our men in here?
How did he get the people? The Africans.
We are outside and we are roaming, or we are there, and we know that these people, that is what they are doing. We know that anytime our people get here, it's going to be hell for them. How did they get access to catch us outside the country?
Those times, the Africans were not united. We were not. And though we are all black people, because we didn't speak the same languages, there was no common leader that ruled over those different jurisdictions. The jurisdictions in Africa were empires, kingdoms, chiefdoms, states, and various communities. They didn't see themselves as one people. If I speak my language and you can't speak it, that means you are not from the same places, or you are not from the same jurisdiction or the same community. Due to that, you are not one people. But long before the Europeans came, the Africans then were practicing what's called domestic servitude. There's a difference between domestic servitude and slavery. The reason is that we were not keeping our own people in places like this. We were not changing the names of our people. Our people would get married. We were not taking our people outside the continent. That didn't happen. Our people were not allowed to cross the ocean to another place because we all knew that though we were black people, and Africa was the continent for every black person. That is what we were practicing. But when the Europeans came, they capitalized on the systems in Africa. One of the weaknesses of African people is that we are very peaceful people. That is one weakness that we have. So when the Europeans came, from the beginning, the Portuguese that came were practicing what's called violent aggression. They themselves were kidnapping the Africans along the coast of West Africa. But the Africans realized that it was dangerous for them to allow the Portuguese to keep capturing them. So they were fighting back. They formed various forces to fight back. The Portuguese now sat and realized that it was unsafe for them to continue their wicked exercises. So they brought in a trading system. They gave along the coast of West Africa and gave the Africans clothing items, red wine, sugar. Everybody in this world likes to show appreciation. The Africans will give them gold, ivory, spices. Gradually, they started bringing in gun and gunpowder. Use this is good. That is what the food the travel was in Africa. Everybody was fighting. Basically, not every African became a slave, to be honest. Not every. People think that every African was a slave. No, there were people living around the castle. They were not enslaved. They didn't capture them. They didn't take none of their families to the Americas.
Was it all men? In slavery, was all men, no women?
No, I'll take you to the female. There's a female dungeon. We've not been to the female dungeon. Besides saying if there were only men that were shipwrecked, no. You've been to the male dungeon. I'm taking you to the female dungeon. I'm going to tell you what happened in the female dungeons also. From here, I'm taking you to the female part of the history. My Alright, so there are two female slave dungeons, and this one and the other one there. In each one of them were 250 women, so that means there were 500 women. And the only source of light for the African woman in this dungeon were these three windows 1, 2, 3. The conditions here were very bad. Many women got pregnant in the female dungeons because the English did sexual abuse them. Before they take them out to be sexually abused, the colonizers would perform a very weird exercise to find out if the African women were on their menstrual periods or not. If they don't find any blood, take the women out there, they'll clean them and sexually abuse them. Due to that, many got pregnant. All the African women who were pregnant in the female dungeons were taken outside the castle to give birth. But the children to whom the African women gave birth to were allowed to sit on mattresses. And they were the very ones who had names like Johnson, Wilson, Peterson, Langston, Addison, Simpson, Fiala, and many more. And remember back in the middle dungeon, I said it was a church. That church was also a school. The first schools built by the colonizers are called castle schools. And you know what happened? Everything that happened first year. All the systems of the colonizers happened in the castles, slave castles. Every church has a school. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. That school is an Anglican school. That church was an Anglican church. And the Anglican church built many schools. When you go to Elmina Castle, the church there is a Catholic church. That church built many schools. So the brainwashing from the church continues. Everybody likes going to school. It got to a time where even if you're an African and you have a first name African and a surname African, people wouldn't respect you. Do you know that? Like if you're called Wadi, you're not civilized. You have to get a British, French name somewhere that qualifies civilization. It's by now people have come to realize that we have to learn many things that were taught because the history has been watered down. Yeah. Any questions, please? We have a lot. Listen. All right. The door of no return. Can you see it? Now the original door of no return used to be a very small door right here. Very small door. We call this door the door of no return because this is where the Africans made their last exit. Once they walked through this door, that was the end of their lives in Africa. The original door was a tiny door. Now this what happened. All the African men were forced to walk through the tunnel system, and the African women were forced to walk through the female dungeon. Look, the colonizers knew very well that there is no way they could have controlled the African men without chaining them and without pointing guns at them. Go, 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 go. This one. They have big ships about 100 meters away from here. But because the Africans tried to fight back, the English colonizers would bring small boats closer to the castle and force the Africans onto and transport them to the bigger ships. In that order, all the Africans were onto the bigger slave ships. Then they'll just ship them off. From here to the Americas was a very long journey, a very dangerous and scary journey. We call them passage. It's one of the most dangerous processes our ancestors had to endure before they go to the Americas. And as a matter of fact, all the Africans who survived to the Americas, they have average immune system out of those. All those who survived it, they went through hell. They weren't even organized as an area. It became woman to get pregnant because of the kind of pains she had to go through in order to give birth. The African men tried to fight back, but the English colonizers killed them instantly to shoot them in the head. In the moment a few Africans were dead, everyone of them became afraid and submissive. By one of our families. Today we are going to walk through a door. Millions of enslaved African men, over 4 million African men and women were through here, through this castle. Over 40% of all the enslaved African people were being transported by the Portuguese. The Portuguese normally transported Africans to Brazil. That is why Brazil has a very large population of African people. Today, we are going to walk through a door. Millions of our ancestors walked through and never came back to Africa. But I have come to tell you that black energy never dies.
That's great.
Yes.
When they passed through here, they never came back, which means that all those that pass here, we never see them again. They are dead and gone, or where are they now?
Can you remove your mask a little bit, please?
I'm saying that the millions that pass through here, then you are saying that it's a door of no return. When they get out, none of them came back. So, as they took them out, what did they use them for?
They shipped them off to the Americas.
And when they get there, it
They
is
went on plantations, sugar, cane, rice, tobacco. In the southern part of America, they use them as miners.
and
They were the ones who developed, the bridges in the US right now. In Europe, they use them to build those old bridges.
So
That you see.
after using them to do that kind of job, at the end of the day, they are killed or they themselves died and
They die in the process.
Do this kind of
so which means they have no chance of producing better.
But they reproduce a lot.
Yeah, they did.
They do that. Yeah. Have you heard of Black Americans before?
Yeah.
Have you heard of Caribbeans before?
Yeah.
Even in Europe, Black Europeans and all of that. They are all the descendants of the Africans that were transported.
So now that
They come back. I'll show you some once we go through this one. There's a door we call the Dolphin Return. Listen. Blah, blah.
Hey, you guys not coming back.
We will come back again.
You're not coming back. Don't you do what you say? Don't you what you say?
Those kids. What kids? The Return and the Dolphin Return. The Dolphin Return is not part of the castle system. When the castle was built in 1665, there was no door of return. I personally call this door the door of hope, and this door is connected to the global African diaspora. Before this door was introduced during a historical festival we call Harvest in Emancipation, there were skeletons of 2 people that were brought back to Africa. These 2 people are called Samuel Carson and Madame Crystal. They were enslaved African people who were falsely transported to Jamaica and New York. Samuel Carson was taken to New York in the US, and Madame Crystal to Jamaica. They died and were buried there respectively. In 1998, their skeletons were brought to Accra. From Accra, they brought them to a place called Abanzi. From Abanzi, they brought them across the Atlantic Ocean through the Dolphin Return. This is a symbolic movement. This is to tell the global African diaspora that although the ancestors who were falsely taken could never come back, but because they are the descendants, the blood and the DNA of the ancestors can return to their roots. And this is the place, Cape Coast, Ghana, West Africa. That is the significance of the door of return. However, the skeletons of Samuel Carson and Madame Crystal are reburied at a place called Asin Manson Slave Riverside. Your tour is not completed until you go there. That is where the Africans took their last bath before they were transferred or transported to the slave dungeons.
We've finished the door of no return and we are going back. The history is very sad. It's very sad.
Please come on. This way. Yeah. I want to look here.
Only them wear conditions.
Windows for just one person. The air is fresh, the views are beautiful, it's spacious, comfortable, relaxing, everything is good.
This is the governor's living room. The living room is very big.
The bedroom of the governor has 5 windows. Let's see the church on top of the hill there, just please.
Get children's life.
Church on top of the male slave dungeon. Now, the name of the church is Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. It is an Anglican church of England. Many years after the abolishment, the church was converted into a children's library. Over 90% of the books in this library were donated by visitors who come here for tours. My wonderful families, before what you are standing lies a hole we call a spy hole. It is connected to the male slave dungeon. Back in the male dungeon, I made mention of 1,000 men at a peak season. And this was a church. Now the English colonizers would worship and pray in a church, and the same people come right here and look at the African men in the male dungeon through the spy hole. This is the part that we all do not understand. Now this is where I'd like to end my presentation. Please do not forget there are 3 castles in Ghana: Elmina Castle, Osu Castle, and Cape Coast Castle. Elmina Castle was built by the Portuguese in 1482. That is the earliest slave castle to be built in the whole of West Africa. Elmina Castle is also the biggest castle. Osu Castle is located in Accra. It was erected by the Danish in 1661. It is also known as a Christian Bow Castle. And Cape Coast Castle is this one. This one is the youngest of the slave castle. But Cape Coast Castle is 356 years old, built by the English colonizers in the year 1665. But you know, slavery is still going on in so many dimensions. And as a people, let's come together. Let's educate the younger generation so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Life is very important. Please do not forget that black energy never dies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless you.
Yes.